Welcome, everyone. Today, I'm going to be presenting and talking about a very important topic that has to do with self-care. I first gave this lecture in the context of a mini retreat that we did at the Vedanta Society uh, in San Diego just not too long ago, a couple of weekends ago. Maybe some of you were there. And we were talking about seva and self-care. And in this context, we were talking about serving others as well as yourself as the divine. And this allows us to be of service, unconditional, like selfless service to others, and which many of you probably are, but also understand what some of the obstructions to doing that may be, meaning sometimes in our family situation or in a relationship or at work, we want to intellectually understand, oh, I'm doing this as selfless service for my family or for my partner or whoever, but emotions come up, right? That's one of the things that can interfere with us being able to just purely serve the other as the divine. And we also need to understand taking care of ourselves and really managing our emotions and having emotional regulation and understanding what emotions are is part of our self-care. And I work at Chopra Global, and one of our main pillars of health is emotional well-being and emotional regulation because of what I'm going to talk about today. Emotions really come from the mind and our attachment, our ego attachment to certain thoughts and the stories behind those thoughts. And that, by definition, keeps us separate from our universal self, our divine self. And so when we understand emotions and we don't let our emotions rule us, then we are actually honoring ourselves as divine. We're identifying ourselves as the divine, and we're more able to serve others without uncomfortable emotions getting in the way. Not that they won't come up, but at the end of this talk, I'm going to present a couple of tools that we can use. The first step is awareness. It's always awareness that we're having an emotion, and then tools to be able to let those go so that, again, we can serve selfless selflessly to others. And that was the context of this talk. Even if you weren't at the retreat, you'll benefit from the tools that we're going to be talking about and the understanding of what emotions are. So first, before we start with the information, I want to do a little grounding exercise or a little grounding practice. And this is something you can do every day to become more aware of what's happening internally in your body, because part of, you'll see what I talk about is the embodiment of emotions and how we feel them in the body. But when we're really disconnected from our bodies, we have no awareness that there's anything even going on. So this will be just a simple 1 or 2 minute kind of practice that grounds us in our bodies. All right, so find a comfortable position. If you're seated listening, make sure your legs are uncrossed and they're flat on the floor. And if you're seated on the ground, just make sure you're propped in a comfortable position. And when you're ready, just gently close your eyes. And if closing your eyes completely isn't comfortable for you, just have a very soft gaze toward the ground, but preferably closed so we can go inward. And just relax your arms on your legs in your lap. And let's start by taking 3 slow, deep breaths in and out through the nose. So slowly inhale, relax your abdomen. Let your abdomen expand, and then exhale slowly through your nose. Longer than a usual inhale and exhale. Inhale again. You can even count to 4 or 5, and then exhale slowly through your nose. And one more time. Exhale. Let your shoulders relax. Now just bring your awareness to your body. Move your attention to your feet. Notice any tension you might be feeling there and just have the intention to relax. Maybe inhale. Imagine that prana energy going to your feet, and when you exhale, your feet are relaxed. Now move your attention to your legs as a whole. And inhale, moving the air, prana energy to your legs. And when you exhale, just relax your legs. Release any tension that you might be feeling, any tightness, constriction. Now move your attention to your pelvic area and your low back, buttocks. Notice what you're feeling there. Inhale into that area. And when you exhale slowly through your nose, just sink a little deeper into your seat. Relax muscles, relax your hips. Tension to your abdomen and low back. Inhale and exhale, releasing any tension or constriction in your abdominal muscles in your back. Move your attention upward to your trunk, your chest and upper back, and include your shoulders here. Inhale and exhale, lowering your shoulders, relaxing. Move your attention to your arms. Notice any tightness. If you have a grip, just any tightness you might be holding on to. Inhale into your arms. And with the exhale, just relax any tightness. Moving up to your neck. Notice any tightness there. Inhale. And on the exhale, just imagine a softness in your neck. And lastly, move your attention to your face and your head. Notice if your brows are squinted or you're holding tension in your jaw. Inhale. And on the exhale, let your jaw relax. Let your tongue drop down. Relax the muscles around your eyes. Now just move your attention to your heart subtly. And now without trying to control your breath, just notice your breath here. Notice the rise and fall of your chest. Try to stay in a relaxed state. Moving your awareness to your whole body. See if anything else has come up, if you've re-tightened any areas. And with each exhalation, just release. And now begin to deepen your breath. Maybe exhale with a sigh. And when you're ready, just gently open your eyes. Feel some looseness, relaxation in your body. This is a really important practice to start developing body awareness. And you'll see why. We often, our physiology, what's happening in our body, is reflecting what's happening in our thoughts and our mind. And that's often what we're reacting to when we have emotional turbulence and when we act out, say we have some emotion that feels out of control. And so that's a really great practice to do even on a daily basis. Yoga is a great way to start the day because you when you're doing it mindfully, you're really bringing your awareness into your body. You start to understand the signals that your body is sending you. And the body and the mind are one entity, right? Whatever's happening in the mind is going to reflect in the body. And when your body's tight, that's sending messages back to the brain as the physical organ, you know, through which we, it's the sort of neural correlate of our thoughts, but it's sending messages back that we need to be, tense. And so it's really one entity. And so by relaxing the body, we can relax the mind. By relaxing the mind, the body settles, and we can be more present. So I'm going to show a PowerPoint that really will address kind of this concept of emotions, what they are, again, this concept of the mind-body connection, how daily practices of self-care, especially meditation, a meditation practice is the foundation, how that allows us actually to have more emotional regulation. And there are reasons in the brain changes that happen in the brain when we induce the relaxation response, the part of our nervous system that's the relaxation response, the rest and digest, we call it, the brain, what the part of the brain that's active even shifts. So instead of being in stress mode all the time, we start to activate the parts of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, where we can have more emotional regulation, where we can examine our thoughts and have more cognitive processing. And so that helps us use the tools that we're going to talk about. So starting with a meditation practice, whether it's a devotional sort of, meditation, or repeating a mantra, or, a breathing meditation practice, mindful awareness practice, if you've learned something, is a great way to start the day. Now I'm going to share my screen, and then we'll go through. Pull up my PowerPoint here. Hold on 1 minute. There we go. Okay. So hopefully you can see this. All right, there we go. So Ayurvedic self-care. And again, in Ayurveda, we have a lot of practices that we do for self-care. And people don't always, they think about it sometimes, oh, it's good for your health, good for the body, and it is. But because the body and mind are one entity, anything we do that's self-care practice from an Ayurvedic perspective will help us calm the mind when we calm the body. And there's a lot of studies on these Ayurvedic practices that it actually induces the parasympathetic nervous system. It calms the nervous system. It relaxes the body, so then the mind can feel relaxed. And vice versa. In Ayurveda, there's a strong recognition that physical ailments, a majority of them, some texts you see 2/3 of physical ailments are from an emotional root cause. So when we have unregulated emotions, a lot of anger, a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear, sadness, that can actually be a setup for creating disease. So within ourselves, it interferes with us sort of, again, expressing the divine within. And also it interferes with relationships and our ability to selflessly serve others. So it's very important to do self-care practices. And again, this is why this is, I'm moving my little face here. So these are just diagrams of, in different traditions, they have different ways of talking about this mind-body connection and our experience as humans. Many of you may have learned the koshas, or the sheaths, that sort of these layers that cover up our, divine nature, or our consciousness, our universal nature, which is Anandamaya kosha, right? The layer of bliss. In yoga traditions, they really focus on these kosha, the kosha concept. And then again, the most outwardly sort of gross layer is the Annamaya kosha, which is the layer made of food, which really represents the physical body. So this thing that we call a body, the food that we eat turns into physical matter, the tissues. So that's known as Annamaya kosha. It's the most physical, gross. But all of these layers are integrated. They're not, we think of them as separate when we're learning them, but they're really very integrated. And anything happening in one layer is going to pervade the others. So when we have something, again, in the physical body, it interferes with us, potentially connecting deeper. Pranamaya kosha is the layer of prana, of energy, our energy body. A lot of this relates, at least there's bridging between our concept of the nervous system and these electromagnetic and electrical signals that our body is communicating cell to cell and tissue to tissue. But even more subtle, like, when we talk about prana, it's nothing you can see or measure, but you know when prana is flowing because the body functions properly. Manomaya kosha, the mental, the thoughts, the sensory impressions, that's the layer, the mental layer. And then Vijnana Maya kosha is the intellectual layer. So this is where we take all these impressions and the things we look at and read and hear, and we process that intellectually. This is where we can do self-inquiry and reflection and contemplation. So it's the intellectual layer. And then the layer of Anandamaya kosha, the bliss, where we really are experiencing consciousness, soul layer, so to speak. In Ayurveda, it's very similar, and you can see this other diagram here with the koshas. In Ayurveda, there's gross body, subtle body, causal body. So the stula sharira is the physical body, so what we might think of as Annamaya kosha. The sukshma sharira is the mental layer. So that, pranamaya kosha is kind of that bridge between body and then the mental space, right? Using the breath, because we move the breath with the body. And then manomaya kosha, vijnanamaya kosha are part of that subtle body. And then ultimately the karana sharira, which is the causal body, is our true nature, that unchanging, infinite, soul, spirit, Atman, and ultimately sort of Brahman, right? Consciousness, pure consciousness. And that is the cause of the other two. So again, in the Ayurvedic traditions, in yoga traditions, in the Vedic, teachings, we have these concepts of these layers of our experience, but they're all integrated. They all, again, are connected. We say connected, and really in the truest sense, they're one integrated experience. So, oops, why isn't this going forward? Oh, here. So this is why we do want to, sorry, I'm just gonna get all of the bullets here. This is why we do, again, want to understand our emotions. Sometimes we think, oh, I'm above all of that. I'm just going to do my worship. I'm going, to think about God, and, all will be well. And of course, that's true to some degree. And we're humans, and as human beings, emotions are part of our human experience. And when we deny our human experience and think, oh, I'm above all that, it's something called denial. So we all have emotions. If you're a human being, if you identify that we do have this individual aspect of who we are, our individual nature, then we will, then you're a human being. We will have emotion. So what is an emotion? And again, emotions aren't bad, right? They are just an experience that we have as humans. And when we don't resolve our emotions, when we don't understand our emotions, when we don't process our emotions, that's when that can start to interfere with us in relationships to ourselves and to others. So what's an emotion? Emotion starts with a thought. It always starts with a thought. We have a thought in the mind. So that's why we think of emotions in the mental layer. And because of the story or the attachment that we might have to whatever thought it is, that creates a sensation in the body. It triggers a chemical reaction in our body. So a thought that we have some sort of narrative or story around will create some sort of chemical reaction in our body. Thoughts are neutral. Ultimately, when you become the witness and the observer, an emotion or a thought potentially may have no effect on the body, whatever thought it is. That's, we hear this, right? Ultimately, as we grow on our spiritual path and maybe enlightened beings, happy, sad, it's the same, right? This is why, because you just observe. There's no story attached to any of it. There's no all the things that I'm going to talk about. You just observe the experience of a thought. It comes, it goes, just like a cloud. It doesn't affect you. Again, that's like we hear these things, and we might have glimpses of that. And when you start to have a regular meditation practice, a regular mindfulness practices, you do start to notice, oh, that thing that person always used to say that would just trigger me, it doesn't anymore. So that's where we're going. That's the direction we're headed in when we start to process emotions, uh, understand and detach from them, observe our thoughts, become aware of the sensation that it's creating in the body. And that's awareness. That's the first step to this emotional clearing. And again, I want to emphasize why we do this. Of course, so we have good health and we have good relationships, ultimately, so that we start experiencing everything as the divine, ourselves and others. So emotions are feelings or sensations in the body. That's why we call them feelings. We have sensations in the body that are associated with a thought in the mind. And again, these emotions are typically reactions to those stories, the narratives, the rules. Somebody said something, that's right, that's wrong, they shouldn't have said that, whatever it is. Our ego mind has created these rules, and then that's what this emotion comes from. It can depend again on the doshas. So there's different mind body types, mind body constitutions and tendencies. Some people have a tendency to have certain emotions or certain reactions to stress. Also, people might have more tamasic or rajasic, sort of these guna, these qualities, and that's that will create a certain identity with certain reactions to thoughts. That's why we want to cultivate a sattvic lifestyle, pure foods, pure thoughts, so that then we start to have purity of the sort of stories and narratives around our thoughts. So the pictures here just represent, again, this concept that thoughts are just neutral, experiences are neutral, but it's the story that we have around them that creates the emotion. And really, a lot of people, there's different ways to think about emotions and moods and feelings, and there's many different, I'll talk about a few of them, of ways to categorize them. But so a lot of people say they're either based in love and expansion or fear and constriction, right? So feelings that emotions that make us feel constricted are always based in fear. We're afraid of something, but it can include sadness, anxiety, anger, frustration, shame, guilt. We feel constricted, right? Other emotions make us feel expansive. They're love, happiness, pleasure, connection, joy, all of those things. We feel expansive, right? So that's one way to categorize love or fear. This picture on the left with the down arrow, so it's an example of a stock. So this is the stock market, this is the stock exchange. So the experience, the objective neutral event is there's a particular stock, it's going down, 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 down. That's objectively what's happened. It's not good or bad, except the story we have around it, right? So if somebody's watching that stock because they want to buy it, they're going to be thrilled, expansive. Oh, finally it's come down, I'm going to buy. Because, that's what you do. You buy low, right? Sell high. Let's say it's somebody who was getting ready to sell that stock and retire on it, and they're going down, 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 down. Their story is, this is bad. Oh no. Now, the person on the right, oh my goodness, there goes my retirement. Same event, two different emotions, right? Because of the story that is attached to that event or that thought that happened. So hopefully that makes sense. This is, starting to help you understand thoughts creating that we have a story attached to that will create some sort of emotion and physiological response. And the people have studied this. This was a study that was done 10 years ago, and it has been reproduced. Many people study this concept of emotions in our body. Our body keeps, there was a book written by a PhD behavioral therapist, Bessel van der Kolk. who wrote The Body Keeps the Score, because we actually experience emotions in the body. And this is why I was talking about body awareness. And oftentimes this is what we feel and it's what we're reacting to. So this is just one study. If you're interested in studies, you can go look it up. But essentially what it's self-reporting all across the globe. This is universal across cultures. When you ask people, imagine happiness. Now have a feeling of disgust in your mind, like come up with a scenario, and then they had them go through all of these emotions and now describe what you feel in your body, where you feel it, how it feels, hot, cold. They were using mostly, for different emotions. And it was very consistent. So you can see people feel, cold in their hands and feet when they're depressed, right? And sometimes, and sad. Anger, look at that hot head, right? I feel just heat. In Ayurveda, this is a pitta imbalance, anger, there's fire. But happiness feels warm too, but all over your whole body. So again, the reason I share this is just so that you can start to understand what we're reacting to or responding to is a sensation in the body that we're having. That's actually what we're responding to. When people say, oh, that triggered me, that's kind of a concept people are talking about now, or they pushed my buttons. What that means is whatever the person said, I have some kind of thought or story around that, and I'm feeling something in my body. That's all that means. And what happens ultimately is we react to that. So why do we react to these things? What is the purpose, right, of all of this? So this goes back to our desires, right? When we are in fear, like that example in the stocks, when we perceive that something's you know we're not going to have enough money, or we're not going to be loved, or we're not going to be accepted, or there's some threat to us, that's you know triggers that survival mechanism within us. From an Ayurvedic perspective, in the mind, we're always trying to be happy, right? Because our ground state, our natural state is happiness. It's health and happiness. That is that pure potential that we have. That's our nature. And when things get in the way of that, we're trying to get back to our natural state of happiness. So that's why we all share this desire to be happy. This isn't just temporary pleasure, like, oh, I want to be happy in the moment. This is, and again, these are English words, but what we want is that Anandamaya Kosha. We want that bliss, that evenness, peace, bliss that comes when our identity isn't around all these ego stories. We identify as the divine, and so we're just in a state of bliss all the time. That's what we're trying to do. And what happens is, as soon as we're born, we learn that okay, I want to be happy, and so we learn to look outside of ourselves, right? And so most of our lives into adulthood until the time we die, most people are seeking happiness from external sources. We're taught that if we have that accomplishment, if we go to that medical school, or if we get that CEO position, or if I drive that car, or if I own that house or live in that place, I'll be happy. Or if my child lives in that house, if my child, does this, still you're attaching your happiness to something outside of yourself, how your child's accomplishments are, how all of these things. So think about what is interfering with you feeling happy. Most of the time, it's going to be you're looking for happiness in some external source outside of you. And what's the problem with that? That can give us temporary happiness at the ego level. We feel this false sense of security. Oh, they're going to be fine now. They got married. They did the, I'm giving examples of, like, if you're looking at your child, or, oh, I'm taking it back to yourself. I got this job. Now life is good. The problem is, if we hang our hat of happiness on anything that's temporary, which by definition in the Vedic teaching and in truth, everything is temporary. Anything we can perceive, see, smell, taste, experience is temporary. The only thing that's infinite is God, right? Or the divine, or consciousness, our true nature. So when we come from a state of self-referral, when we connect to our inner divinity, happiness, bliss, Anandamaya Kosha, and we can bring that out in our day-to-day lives, That's where our happiness comes from. It doesn't matter what's happening around us, whether we lose that job, we aren't devastated. If our kid doesn't do what we think they're supposed to do, um, we're not, stressed. So instead of being object referred, where the objects of our happiness are outside of us, we become self referred. Our happiness comes from the subject, ourselves, rather than the object, something outside of us. That's the true nature of who we are, our state of being, this divine. So this is why, we want to get more and more and more self-referred rather than object-referred, because anything can be taken away. Anything that's temporary, by definition, everything, then we're unhappy. So it's a recipe for disaster. Another analogy is there can be waves of all the turbulence and waves at the top of on the ocean, the waves. But if you are able to dive inward deeply into that ocean, that infinite ocean of bliss, you can look at the turbulence, you can observe it, but you are just at peace, right? So that's ultimately what can happen. But what gets in the way of that? There's different ways to think about that. Again, a lot of people say the barriers to happiness are attachment to the past, memories from the past, or that person did that to me and I'm still upset about it, that thing that happened to me, or the future, anxiety about the future, or expectations, desires that we're either thinking about the past or the future. We're never present. So that's where we talk about present moment awareness. When you're in the present, truly present, there's only happiness. There's only love, because you're not thinking about something that happened before and you're not anxious about the future. So this is why meditation and present moment awareness, all these mindfulness practices you may have heard about, are important. We can also think about it from this concept. Many of you have heard about the kleshas. These are the things that interfere. These are the afflictions of the mind, right? That interfere with us experiencing that bliss. The fear of death, ultimately, when we don't understand who we really are, we think we're going to die, which is just the end of the physical body, but who we really are doesn't die, right? So avidya, asmita, it's like, again, identifying with our ego self and being ignorant of who we really are. And these attachments to things that we want to have happen, and running away, aversion from the things that we don't want to have happen. So these are all, again, just different ways of thinking about what is getting in the way of our happiness. And when you can overcome these, and ultimately overcoming the kleshas even has to do with understanding who you really are. And meditation really is the key practice, or self-inquiry, contemplation, self-study, all of these techniques. In the Bhakti traditions, it can be, some sort of, it can be a yoga practice, or it can be devotional practice with the intention of merging with the divine, right? So what happens when we have emotions? And because we all have emotions, right? Our natural state is bliss, but because we're human beings, it's inevitable we have stories that come up in our lives, attachments to things. There is a way to process emotions, to start to become a witness to the emotions, so that they're not stuck in your body and you're not reacting to them all the time. So when feelings or emotions aren't fully expressed and processed, that's when they can start to be emotional toxicity. Or there's a word for that in Ayurveda, ama. Typically, ama, or toxicity, we think of as physical toxicity. You have ama in your body, or you're full of toxins, toxicity, inflammation, whatever. There's different ways to think about it. But you can also think of that as emotional toxicity. So signs of accumulating emotional toxicity sometimes can be physical, fatigue, but also irritability. You're just blah, lack of enthusiasm, emotional reactivity, negativity. And if these things aren't taken care of and processed, examined, and reflected on, released through, we're going to talk about a few processes. They're repressed emotions. We think we don't have them. We just push them down. I'm just going to push this down. It's like trying to hold a ball underwater. Eventually it comes up like an explosion. And that's what happens, right? So we can't repress our emotions. We can't pretend we don't have them and just repress them. That's not a thing. This is the problem a lot of people have. They think, no, I'm not an angry person. No, and even if you don't show it, if you feel it and you haven't processed it, it's in there. And it'll eventually lead to hostility, guilt, depression, anxiety, irritability, hostility, like arguments with people, shame, guilt, all of these, um, really what become mental health issues. So we don't want to repress our emotions. What we want to do is learn how to communicate. If we want, if in relationship to other people, we want to communicate properly with ourselves. What am I feeling? Just even asking that question, what am I feeling right now, starts this self-awareness process. And then, there are ways to talk about whatever it is that, this emotion that's coming up, in a way to process it, so we release it, and it's not stuck in the body. So otherwise what happens is, again, we have this physiology that's of inflammation, and disease. So there are these different biological responses. I'm going to quickly kind of go through the 7 biological responses that we can have as human beings. So the first one is a fight, flight, or flight, fight, freeze, it says here. Fight or flight, you've probably heard of, and freeze response. These are primitive ancient responses that are grounded in the survival instinct. This is a necessary process that we have. When our physical body is threatened, it's based on fear, because sometimes there are things to, we could die, right? If there's an invader, or there's a dangerous animal, there's a fire alarm that goes off, we could die. So immediately our body goes into fight or flight. Our blood pressure goes up, our heart rate goes up. You feel it in your body, right? If you're sitting here right now and you heard your fire alarm go off in your house, you would feel something in your body. It's a physiologic response from this reptilian brain. You can see the picture I put here of the brain. That's like the fight or flight part of our brain that will react in a minute so that you can run out of the house. The blood gets shunted from the digestion to the muscles so that we can run. Our blood gets more sticky, because if we get cut, it'll clot. Our immune system goes activated, because if the bacteria get into our system, it can fight off the infection. So this is important for survival. But what happens when it's not an actual physical threat, it's an emotional perception of threat. Someone said something to me, and it threatened my position. It threatened my idea of myself. Think about it. If you think of yourself as I'm a smart person, and somebody sort of implies, or you even perceive that they're saying something, maybe they're not, that maybe you don't know what you're talking about. I'm sure some of you out there have felt like this feeling in your body. That's the fight flight response, based on someone says something. Your story in your head is that they threatened, they passed this this minefield of yours. They stepped on a mine, they triggered me, they pushed that button. And we go into the fight response, we start arguing, or flight response. This has to do with your mind body type sometimes. Pitta types will fight and argue, and won't stop until they convince you of that they're right. The vata might run away. They get like anxious. They're like, oh, they don't like conflict. They get very anxious inside. You know what that feels like? Anxiety. Maybe their heart starts palpitating, and then they just want to run away. Flight. Sometimes kaphas, which are another mind body type, will go into freeze mode. They just shut down. They're like, I don't want to deal with this. I'm going to just, like this woman in this picture, it's like, I'm not going to deal with this. I'm going to withdraw. Sulk, shut down. So all of these, you can get critical and judgmental. You can withdraw. You can get anxious and nervous, and that can be your response. These are all physiologically the equivalent of fight or flight, but they're based on, again, the mind and our ego responses to things that are happening in our life, things that people say. Now, what happens? Oh, these are just examples. When we said love, fear, Well, what do you mean fear? What am I afraid of by this person saying it? Being criticized, being rejected, not being loved, not being accepted. Maybe somebody says something that you don't understand. It's like the unknown. Sometimes that can trigger, for somebody who's really in control and wants to be in control of everything. If somebody all of a sudden throws something on you, you can go into, fight, flight, because of the unknown. These are all biological survival things, right? In order to survive, we needed to know what was going to happen. We needed to be loved and accepted by our community. Otherwise, we might be thrown out. Like, if you think about back in the days, now it's not as applicable, right? I mean, this could still happen, but we can survive. Dying, fear of dying, changing old habits or patterns. We're very attached to our habits, our patterns of thinking. If that's threatened by someone, look at all the things in the world. If you don't think the way I do, I'm going to fight you. Being in pain, giving up my story, my whole identity of who I think I am in an ego sense, stepping out of my comfort zone, losing my image. These are all things we're afraid of at the ego mind level, right? But this constricts us and limits us. And it doesn't, when we're attached to all these ego thoughts, we're completely detached from understanding who we really are. And so these things will induce the stress response in the body. So how do we get out of this? Most people in the world are just stuck in these first two, this reactive response. Everything's perceived as a threat. You said something, you insulted me. Again, when we go back to this is, I didn't get this job. You didn't get this job. You didn't marry who I wanted you to. You don't believe in what I believe in. This is part of the reactive response. It just keeps us stuck in these first two biological responses and these levels of awareness. They're constricted levels of awareness. So what happens when we start to meditate? So we start to access different levels of awareness and the body shifts. So when we meditate, also known, when we're present, this state of restful awareness or turiya, it's elicited through the practice of meditation or like meditative practices, which can be devotional. They can be, again, many different ways, where you start to detach from your identity with your thoughts and your physical body. You start to identify more and more with the silence that is consciousness, God. And that is the opposite of the stress response, what happens in the first two. So we induce the parasympathetic, and this has been studied. There are genetic changes that happen that move us more toward health and away from disease and inflammation. Our brain starts to move out of the stress part of the brain into the more emotional regulation in the limbic brain and the cognitive, the prefrontal cortex. Now I can witness. I'm not my thought. We're not our thoughts. We're not our stories. I'm not even this body. I'm the observer of the body. I'm the observer of these thoughts. We can have moments where we start to shift our identity toward our true self, our true nature, consciousness, the soul, whatever you want to say, or whatever you want to call it, Atman. And we start to experience peace in the body, peace in the mind. And we realize that we have choices. We start to recognize there's a space between what something happened and how I react to it. When something happened, I can observe what's happening in my body. I can observe the thought that I'm having because of what this experience I'm having. And I can pause, and now I can make a choice of how I respond. It's not just a reaction. I don't know if you're ever in situations where you're just like, this person says something, you say the same thing back, they say the same thing back, you say the same thing back. Nothing ever changes. That's the definition of insanity, they say, right? Like doing the same thing over and over, or saying the same thing over and over and expecting a different, outcome. That's the definition of insanity. So now all of a sudden we see this space, we have this opportunity to use the tools that I'm going to talk about. So now we become a conscious choice maker. So this is what happens when we start to meditate. And as we become regular meditators and we start to experience more and more of this space, this silence, now we can take this silence into our day-to-day lives. So you really should have a practice where you sit down, you spend 15-20 minutes a day, and you just are present. You're not thinking, you're not in your thoughts, you're not moving your body. You're just repeating your mantra. You're, maybe just focusing on your breathing. You can do this as part of a yoga practice, right? Because sometimes people need to, like, they move their body, they do an asana practice, and you lay in shavasana. And that's when you just become being the witness. So different ways to do it, but now we can take this silence and this space into our day-to-day lives, into our conversations, into our relationships, into our experiences. And then what happens? Now we've started to open up this gateway. We've opened this gate, this door to the higher biological responses and higher levels of awareness that we have within us. So these are terms that we use at Chopra. The next one is intuitive response. There are things in the Vedic literature that, like Deepak has actually kind of tried to make analogies so we can understand these things. There's a term called Turiya Tat that's like beyond Turiya. But it's really about bringing that silence and that space back into our lives. So now we can access this silence again, no matter where turbulence is happening. So now we can start to observe the emotions arising within us. Now, you know how when you're really upset and somebody says, just take a deep breath, or, you know, don't be upset. Does that ever work? No, but you know why? Because we're stuck in the amygdala, that reptilian brain I showed you. So you might know a tool. In fact, after this lecture, you might be like, yeah, next time this happens, I'm going to take 3 deep breaths. Next time I know. But if you're not meditating and you're not cultivating that silence within you, it's easy to just go back into the reactive state, right? We need these daily practices so that we can start to cultivate the prefrontal cortex. So then what happens in your day-to-day life is now you've activated this part of your brain and you can activate this intuitive response. You become intuitive. Now you actually can take a pause. What emotion, what's arising within me? What am I feeling? What's the thought that's here? And now there's a space and I get to choose what I'm going to say next based on having a better understanding of what's happening. And this starts to allow for conscious communication. So in the retreat, we talked about like a mood map. Label the emotion that you're having. Label, identify where you're feeling something in your body and label the emotion that you're having. If you haven't cultivated having this space, it's going to be really hard to use all of these tools, right? But now you can start to say, what am I feeling? Okay, let me label this. And now you can pull out your tools. We teach conscious communication in our Chopra education programs based on the work of Marshall Rosenberg, who was he just recently passed, but he spent decades, PhD, psychologist, writing about nonviolent communication. I would highly recommend, you can look up online, just put in nonviolent communication word list. He's written some books as well, Marshall Rosenberg. And I started using that when I started doing this emotional work. I've done this, and so I started like, okay, what am I feeling? And sometimes we have a temptation to say, you made me mad, you did this to me, you did that. I'm feeling manipulated, or I'm feeling taken advantage of, which is kind of pointing the finger outward. Now we all understand what that means, and it's not that something didn't happen to you, but what we want to do is identify how I'm feeling about whatever it is that happened to me. Not what happened, how am I feeling about it? So I feel scared, I feel hurt, I feel angry, I feel nervous, I feel lonely, I feel joyful. There's different words that give you ownership of what your emotion. Because when you say I feel abused, that means the other person has to change their behavior in order for you to feel better. This is what we talked about in the beginning, object referral. You change what you're doing so I can be happy. How many times have you thought that or said it to someone, right? We all do this because that's what we learn. This is the work, and it's not easy work, but it's necessary work on a spiritual path, in my opinion. So now you say, okay, that happened. How am I feeling? Now I can do something about it. I have ownership. This is empowering work. It empowers me to understand I have this emotion. I can process it. I can examine it. I can examine what's the story that's attached to that. As an example, you can say, oh, I feel unappreciated. Oh, I feel tired. Maybe that's how I'm feeling. So instead of then the next time somebody does something saying you have to change that, I can examine this, I can say, okay, I feel tired. What can I do about that? Right. And so then you begin to have control over shifting those emotions, processing them. Not that you don't feel them, you feel them fully, and then you release them. And then sometimes, again, then you can communicate with somebody instead of saying, you don't appreciate me. You can say, when you don't pick up your dishes after yourself, you know, I feel sad. Or, I feel you're taking ownership of it. I feel tired, because I do have to do them. And I feel tired and it makes me sad. Right. Or, so this is the work of Marshall Rosenberg. He would say, don't use victimizing language where, I'm a victim of what you just did to me. Use non-victimizing language. Own, and it can be, again, it can be sad, it can be angry, it can say, I feel angry, um but you can communicate that more consciously. When this happens, I feel angry. And then you can start to make, this goes back to the intuitive response and conscious communication. Then you can say, I'd like to request that, when you're done eating, can you please put the dishes away? Put, your own. Um, you make a request, not a demand, right? Another scenario would be like, you don't appreciate me, and you never do this, and from now on, you're doing your own dishes. That's a very different thing than a conscious communication of like, when I see those dishes on the table, I feel really angry and tired or something, right? You get to choose. You get to choose. How do you feel? Different people are going to feel different things in those situations. So I would request that you please, take care of your own dishes, you know, and, I would really appreciate that. Or again, in the books too, they give multiple scenarios and ways, scripting of like ways to sort of use conscious communication. It doesn't always mean you get what you want, but you're actually more likely to not put someone on the defensive and have them actually, oh, okay, when you're not blaming them for everything, right? So you might get what you want more, but even if you don't, you can process your own emotion and step into the situation in present moment again. It's not like, oh, this has happened for the thousandth time, right? So even if you don't always get what you want, that's not the point. Um, you don't feel exhausted from it. And actually, when you start this again, the more you meditate, the more you process your emotions, and you don't let that clog up your energy channels. These, you keep that those koshas clear, so that mental space is clear, so that you can, actually connect to your divine. You start to have creative responses, because creativity comes from, it's one of the qualities that come from consciousness. Truly creative responses is from consciousness. It's not the intellectual mind, what a lot of people like to think that. So this is the application of a new context or meaning to a situation or circumstance. So all of a sudden one day you might say, I've never thought of this solution. Maybe we should do this, right? Like with the dish issue. And you might be surprised at the creative solution that comes to you when you create space. You're not all clogged up with the story and the narrative. You have space, and creative solutions start to emerge, things that you might not have otherwise thought of. So there's a way to kind of cultivate the creative response within you. And so this is the eyes here. You set an intention, you gather information, you let it incubate. This is like the meditation part. And the sankalpas, like you set intentions deep into this field of pure potential. And then eventually that can lead to, the incarnation of this things. This is this world of manifestation that, you might hear about in certain contexts, but it comes from consciousness, this creative response that we awaken. The next thing that happens now as we start to meditate or do our practices, we start to realize I'm not even just Sheila Patel, and my ego self, this self that navigates through the world, which we need to all have a name. And if we want to interact in this play, this creative play of the universe, we need a name, we need a body to do that, to interact with each other. But that's not who I really am. We start to realize I have all of these potentials within me. That's what the visionary response is. Now, I'm not just this separate self. I'm actually all of humanity. We start to be able to tap into the qualities of our archetypes. these gods and goddesses that we, actually when you do a puja, or you're like do a worship, or you have a practice, you're actually having an intention to embody the qualities of that deity within you. We have it within us. Sometimes we think like we're asking them for something, which is, it's a way to have a personal kind of relationship. But what's happening when you really connect to, in these gods or goddesses or deities, you're awakening the qualities that they represent within you. And so, a lot of times people will feel like they want to awaken certain qualities, and it can be a historical figure. Like I think of Gandhi, Mother Teresa. They have quality. Jesus for some people, Buddha. They have these qualities that we want to awaken within us, because when we start to expand our identity of who we really are, then we realize I have all of those potentials dormant within me. And so ultimately, we start to expand our identity wider and wider and wider to Brahman. This is what we say, Aham Brahmasmi. I am the universe. And ultimately, again, this is an enlightened being, which we can have glimpses of this sacred response where this is where I was saying, somebody can say something can happen, and that just flows right through us. We don't even get stuck in any emotions because we've let go of all the ego stories. There's nothing that can make us, even again, happy or sad, angry or elated. We're just bliss, peace, equanimity, regardless of what's happening. And in any situation, the response is, how can I be of service? Instead of saying, what's in it for me? Even if you're volunteering or doing things and you say, well, I want my name on that. That's actually, it's great. I'm not opposed to anyone volunteering, or giving money or donate or whatever. But if that's really not selfless service, right? You want somebody to know what you're doing. There's a little bit of a need of the ego right there. Again, not saying that's good or bad. I'm just saying in the sacred response, when we're enlightened, when we can completely release that ego sort of needs, desires, this is where we've transcended the mind, we've transcended the body, we've transcended the desires. We actually transcend emotions, and we can just be in compassion and empathy all the time. That's our natural expression. It's just consciousness. How can I be of service? How can I say, why? Because we are identifying as the divine. We see everything around us as the divine. And so now by serving someone else, you're serving yourself as the divine, and or if you want to think of it as you're serving the divine in that other person, that's what you see, and you're tapping into your own divine nature to do that. So this is just the map. This is the map. It doesn't, and it's not hierarchical. It's not like, oh, am I in the sacred response? No, I'm here. No, it's how can I awaken these different dormant potentials, the visionary response within me? How can I awaken the more creative response in my life? How can I become more of a selfless servant to others by awakening this sacred response within me, even little by little by little, right? It's like they say, I think in there's stories about dipping a white t-shirt into a vat of dye. It comes out a little bit pink. Then every time you meditate, every time um, are just present, every time you really truly serve completely selflessly and unconditionally, you're bringing out the t-shirt, the shirt just gets more and more and more dyed with that bright color. And so that's what we're doing in our day-to-day lives. We're bringing up more and more and more of these higher levels of awareness and behaviors and physiology. In this physiology, no inflammation, no, every cell is just functioning as it's supposed to. And then what happens when we're serving others? So there are people that have studied like the electromagnetic field around us. This is very consistent with an aura, as we talk about, or the prana around us, these fields, these auric fields. So we have prana flow within us. It also flows around us, and people can actually measure electromagnetic energy. When you focus on your heart and you're in a state of compassion, love, gratitude, it sends out a different electromagnetic vibration than if you're angry. So if you're doing something and you're serving someone and you're angry and you're doing it, there's a different energy that you're putting out there. That's why it's important to sort of work through emotions and release them so that you can really emanate love and compassion instead of, again, it's not only the behavior you're doing, it's what's the energy that you're putting out. And again, people have studied this. You can shift the energy of other people in the room. So this is where, like, when people get together and they worship and they do group meditation and pujas and, really truly, if you're not just going through the motions and you're going within, they've done studies where, like, three people, if you just focus on your heart and you think gratitude, appreciation, you shift the vibration in the room. And then a fourth person who, because they've done this, they've put monitors on people and they tell them, oh, go in, there's different people working on computers, and they tell people, oh, you're going to take an exam. And so, their heart rate variability looks like a little stressed. And they sit down and they just think everyone's just on the computer, taking exams. But the other people in the room have been told, to do these sorts of heart practices. And this is like in Buddhist meditations where you meditate on a particular quality, loving kindness, compassion. What happens is that fourth person who walks in the room, it shifts their heart rate variability and their vibration. So by cultivating this divine within us, we can actually change the world, ideally. And again, one way of doing that is through the breath. You can do it through heart awareness, but just by circulating prana through pranayama practices. This is in the yoga tradition. You learn a lot of different pranayama that can actually help to, again, like I said, we feel emotion in the body. There's a stuckness there. It's like a dam to the flow of prana. So when we're doing when we're doing pranayama and we're creating flow, it's clearing out the sheets, the layers, the obstructions, wherever we're kind of holding on tightly to an emotion in our body. It can actually help to clear emotions. So this is one way. This is why when you're feeling something a reaction in your body, just stop. Take 3 deep breaths. You can even do it with your eyes open, and then you proceed. Because what happens is, instead of that urge in your body that's you're gonna like, oh, I want to yell at that person, or I want to start crying, or whatever it is, or oh, I'm anxious. You stop, you breathe, and then you proceed. It will be a very different response, right? That you're not reacting to that sensation in your body. You're actually responding from a place of witnessing awareness. So we can do it through expanding pranayama. So we say stay calm and centered when dealing with drama. So don't contribute to the melodrama. This is why we have daily practices. You want to have daily practices, and reduce the drama that you share with others. Again, like, what are you cultivating all around you? And so a lot of this, again, is reflection, self-reflection, and inquiry. Engage in social interactions that raise your level of awareness, not keep you stuck where you are. Again, if you hang out with people that are angry, you're gonna it has to do with that vibration slide that I showed you. If you hang out, as you well probably are aware, if you come to the Vedanta Center, you hang out with people that have a higher vibration, you feel better. That's why when you are just in the presence of an enlightened person, you feel better. But also you can do, try some sort of breathing technique. Every day you should be doing this. And, person dependent means it depends, everyone's different. But an easy one to do in the moment when you're feeling a strong emotion is called stop. So you can stop. S is for stop. And you can also think, stop. T is take 3 deep breaths. So you stop, you don't react immediately. You take 3 deep breaths, just slowly. Always observe what's happening in your body. If you feel a strong place of tension, observe that. And you can even breathe into it. Just by placing awareness there, it will start to dissipate. Then the P is proceed. Then you proceed with your next action. So stop, take 3 deep breaths, observe what's happening in the body. And I think that His Holiness the Dalai Lama actually has used this and says, observe and imagine a smile in every cell in your body. Like, just imagine your whole body smiling, and then you proceed. So that's another thing you can do. Pranayama, so there's alternate nostril breathing, ujjayi, which is the little bit of constriction and vibration that actually, those sorts of pranayama techniques stimulate a nerve, the vagus nerve, that induces the parasympathetic. It relaxes us. So this is something you could do on a daily basis to keep your nervous system calm. Because when your nervous system is calm, you'll be calm when you respond to people. If your nervous system is up here and something happens, you're going to react. You're stuck in those fight or flight, like we talked about. You can also just do paced breathing every day. I tell people to do breathe in for 5 minutes, just hold for 2 seconds at the top of the inhale, and then exhale for 5 seconds. So there's other organizations that teach inhale 5, exhale 5, inhale 5, exhale 5. I put in that little 2-second breath hold. It's, because in yoga that there's some significance to that. So breathe in 5, you hold for 2 seconds, exhale 5. And you may need to compress your belly button toward your spine to get a whole good exhalation. There's other breathing techniques. Andrew Weil, who's an integrative physician, teaches 4, 7, 8. Inhale 4, hold for 7, and then slowly exhale 8. It's a little hard for people sometimes in the beginning to hold for 7. So even just doing, again, any kind of heart-focused breathing where you focus on your heart and breathe slowly and just think love, peace, appreciation. That's attitude breathing, like bring in a positive attitude, and then you proceed. So doing some sort of breathing every day, 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes in the evening. If you do at least 10 minutes a day, you're going to start to change your state of being. And then in a moment that you're feeling a strong emotion, you will be able to use the stop. Because otherwise, we just feel like our emotions are controlling us, right? So you have to do something every day to actually cultivate that ability to just be the witnessing awareness. So this is a process, 7 steps to emotional clearing. That's another tool that maybe you do when you have a couple of hours, that you can do some self-care. Emotional clearing is part of your self-care just as much as oiling your body, brushing your teeth, eating your healthy food. So think of it as self-care, just like everything else. And when you clear that emotional layer, you're going to connect to your spirit, your spiritual being, and the divine, the divine within you. So first, take responsibility for what you're feeling. This is what we talked about. Identify the emotion you're feeling instead of blaming it on other people. So I'll give it a name. This is, again, there are many lists out there where you can look, because we need a vocabulary. This is the problem. Most of us have never been taught a vocabulary except you did this to me. And, or they know I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm whatever. But there's a whole vocabulary of emotion that might help you identify more what you're feeling. Witness it in your body. Express it in private to yourself. This can be, writing about it. Express the mode. Yeah, so this journaling comes in handy. This is where you could just write it down to yourself as you're working things out. And you can always shred or burn the journaling. Some people are like, I don't want to write things down because people will find it. But try to do that, and then you can release it through a ritual. Like, again, maybe then you burn the piece of paper that you were writing on, but with the intention of clearing. I'm letting this go now. I'm letting this go. Then you can share it with a good listener. We talked about listening in the mini retreat. People, someone who's just listening, they're present, and we did a practice where, again, you're not letting your own thoughts and telling the other person who's talking like, well, this is what you should do. No, you're just listening. So if you have someone in your life who's a good listener, you can share it with them. Or this is where sometimes you can have a deity, or you can have a picture of a grandma or somebody, that you consider someone who inspires you, and you're just talking to them and sharing it. So they will be a good listener if it's a little statue. And then you celebrate this process of like, now you'll usually feel lighter. I've let go of this emotion in my body. Your nervous system will be happy. Your body will be happy. So lots of there. So I'm going to stop the screen sharing and really just close there with again, hopefully in a understanding of what emotions are. We all have them. They come from thoughts. They come from our ego identification and this sort of perception of threat of, threatening who I am, or threatening, what I think I need in my, to accomplish, or, my position, my possessions, etc., my position in society, um, at my job, it's whatever. Uh, it's those stories, which when we identify with ego, me as Sheila Patel, um, we're always going to feel threatened, right? And if we're wanting our happiness to be from something that happens outside of us, that's a recipe for disaster. So we start meditating, we do these, all the different yogas, the past, the karma yoga, the bhakti, the raja yoga, the gyan. It's to help us identify who we really are ultimately, right? The divine. And then we start to see the divine also in everything around us. And so have your practices, meditate, awaken these higher levels of awareness and these biological responses within you, that and they'll just start to happen spontaneously, and people around you will notice. um, and just realize it's a journey. There's no end point. It's just, you will start to not be controlled by your emotions. You will be the controller of your emotion, the observer and the choice maker, the witness and the choice maker, the conscious choice maker. And that's the power of these teachings. And this is the power of, you know, Vedic understanding of metaphysics and these layers of who we really are, is ultimately so that we can, enjoy the play and enjoy our life and enjoy our relationships and have good health. Because while we're here, we might as well. Why suffer, right? Now, again, life is full of things that can happen, that we can be in an accident, we have losses, and it's not that we don't feel emotion. We want to fully feel the emotion, but we don't want it to be dragging us down, and we don't want the emotion to be controlling us. That's really the point. We can observe all of our human experiences and still have access to the bliss and peace that is our true nature. And so, again, I think all of these teachings are there because we do get confused. We forget who we really are. We get attached to our ego, and the teachings are there to help reduce our suffering, and emotional clearing, emotional regulation, understanding these things, and having practices in place is just as important as, again, all of the other things that you may be doing, whether it's for your health, your worship. But we have to tend the mind as well, and the emotional state. So hopefully you got some good, again, in understanding and tools to walk away with. Look up different resources and try out different things that are out there, that you might come across. There's lots of great books and different things out there on, this concept of emotional clearing, especially if there's been significant traumas in your life, that will have a significant effect. And so, but there's a way to transcend that as well. And so, sometimes people need to seek out mental health providers, counselors, pastor, different, we reach to our swamis and, other people in our lives to help us through. But we can do our own. Part of that is also doing our own work, right? So sending the best out to everybody, and hopefully, that will help reduce some of your suffering. And namaste.